Emma, even at the moment, you guys have been thrown, Emma's in Victoria and Cricket Australia headquarters are in Victoria, you've been thrown back into lockdown. So last year you had everything. Well, actually, why don't we start with how the players and coaches were using Teams last year? And I know, the agility of having to try to put this all back into place again right now during another lockdown.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, and it's one that last year was definitely something that we didn't expect, and we didn't know really how we were going to manage such a physical sport and where you need to be coached and trained, and to then find ourselves here again, today and back in lockdown in Melbourne, but then all the other states all over the place. So last year, what we found was, again, it's the winter for us. Usually the players are overseas playing, and we know very clearly right now, it's in the media that the players have all just come back into the country for us. But it is their core training season where they are focused on preparing for our cricket summer. So when we went into lockdown, while we are elite sport and there is a level of exemption for lockdown, that is only where it's not possible to do things remotely. And so as an organisation, we really do try and abide by the rules, and we try and lead by example. So where we possibly could, we did have to do things remotely and online. And what we did find was some of the teams were running their training sessions, whether that was, and particularly because of limitations with how many people you could have around you, whether it was a 1.5 metre distancing or capacity in a room, all of those limitations come into play no matter what and no matter where you are. So we found that teams were doing recordings of their training sessions. It was loading into Stream, which was a tab within their Microsoft Teams site. And off the back of that, they had a Microsoft form that they had to complete, which was then to critique their own session. And then the coach, who may have been remote, for example, at the moment, you've got Justin Langer based in Perth and players that reside in Victoria or Sydney and whatever else in border closures, they would also critique it. So all of our, spin bowling coaches or our batting coaches, they would be able to go in and fill out this form and critique it, but they were having the conversation within the Microsoft team. So, and where it needed to be face-to-face, they were running the virtual meetings like we're doing now, and what we'll do straight off the back of this, where they've got video on and they're having those conversations, or they're saying this is what you need to change and putting it on video, which is really interesting to see how that comes to life in a virtual world. Is it ideal? No, it's not perfect, but I think it shows that you don't need to stop what you're doing. You don't need to stop your training and the like just because borders are closed or you can't be face to face anymore. You can keep going, and so we faced that last year, and I think, it will be really interesting to see where we get to. Where Melbourne, we're in at least a 2-week lockdown as it was extended yesterday, and we're going to have to make changes to the way that they had planned the next 2 weeks of training. We're preparing for a big Ashes year where perfect, West Indies and the likes coming. So we have to really keep up to speed and keep adapting to that. So as we go into lockdown again, these types of tools and functionality that we had in Microsoft Teams are going to come back to life. So I'm really keen to see how it goes, but I know that they're already on the phones and already on video calls trying to make this work as best as possible, and only limiting the face-to-face contact if it's absolutely necessary. And that's, we're in a very different world where it's too much of a risk to our players. If we can do it virtually, we absolutely will.
And I love everything that Genevieve spoke about earlier, and Laurie mentioned too, using Teams as the hub. You were just talking about quite a lot of different apps that you're using, but it's all coming from Teams, which I guess even for the players, they can have that on their mobile devices and things like that, so easily accessible, that type of
exactly.
thing.
And we like our players are, we hire them to play, right? We don't hire them to know the test. We don't give them laptops. They don't need all of this additional things. So for them to just be able to have an app on their mobile phone, just like they would with any other, social media or whatever it is, and be able to do a recording and upload it and make that really simple and easy, or join meetings really easy. That's a key for us is, making sure that it's as simple as possible, because we don't want to overcomplicate this. We want to achieve the goal, which is them to do their training and get the information that they need.
Yeah, and another thing that just as you were talking there made me think is by having all those videos and all that critiquing going on from, you know, other coaches, that if it was a real life training session, you actually wouldn't have all of, you know, all that input from so many other coaches. But it's also a way, I guess, to track progression of training as well. So it'd be interesting in a few years' time, wouldn't it, to go back and have a look at some of those videos
It's a
now
really
that,
good point, isn't it?
yeah.
You know, if you've got a batting issue, you'll be able to kind of go back in a year or two and go, wow, I can so see now why it wasn't working the way that I hoped. So it's all data, it's all knowledge collection, but they don't even know it. They're there to play, and that's what the aim is and why we do it.
Yeah, I love it. So, Emma, can we go right back to the beginning of the team's journey at Cricket Australia? Because I know when I've spoken to you previously, with all the different state organisations and the national body, pretty much everybody used to be on a different platform, and the only way you could connect was to fly together, fly and get together physically.
Yeah, definitely. So the way that the states and territories work alongside Cricket Australia is actually they're all their own legal entities. We all have an overarching, but they kind of stand alone, and we collaborate very well. So years ago it was, I think we had one state on Lotus Notes and the rest on their own environments, and it wasn't efficient, let's be honest. Anyone that knows what it's like when everyone's in different environments, it makes it really hard. And when we start to think about this whole one strategy, and we're all here to deliver cricket and to do it right from grassroots cricket right up to the elite sport, we needed a consistency, because states and territories are responsible for the grassroots and they are responsible for their state land. And then, we've got a responsibility with the elite. So it has to develop and grow together, that it made sense for us to all be on the same platforms and the same environment. So the first thing was to get us all into Microsoft and then into Office 365. And again, Cricket Australia has the overarching of that technology, and we support the states with that. And then out came Microsoft Teams, and you're going to test my memory, but I believe it was 2017, early 2017, we went into the preview of Microsoft Teams, particularly the tech team. We embraced that really quickly and started to really test out. We knew immediately that it was just going to drive our organisation like we didn't see the future before that. So Teams was rolled out and within tech, and we very quickly started going, this needs to go faster. We need to get other teams into this. We need to get cross states and territories into this, because that was our challenge. Our challenge was either a whole heap of emails that were going back and forth, or it was flying around the country every second week, because you needed to collaborate with the states and territories. So we very quickly started to spin up what we would have classified as trial team sites, and once the word of mouth got out there, it kept growing. So as quickly as Microsoft took it out of preview mode, we basically rolled it out and allowed people to access it. And it's now our core. It is as somebody said earlier, it's the start and end of your day. It is absolutely what we drive to. Email still has its place, but internal communications particularly, and by internal I mean all Australian cricket, so all states and territories and the likes, Teams is where we go. We have Teams meetings, we have Teams sites whether they're project sites or they're working groups or they're department sites. We add in all of those additional apps, whether it's, again, Planner, Forms, Stream. We have flows that run into Teams, all of that behind the scenes. We've got a lot more that we can be doing, and we're really excited to see what more we can be doing, but it is the absolute core to how we collaborate now. And as we're in a COVID world, nobody's getting on flights anytime soon. Yeah. Definitely not into Melbourne and not out of Melbourne. So, we're still operating, and we could deliver the biggest season that we've ever delivered last year, and we've only got a bigger season coming in a remote world. And it just proves that technology is there to support the people, and it really does work if you embrace it to its full ability.
So Emma, just tell me please about the Sydney test that was on in January, just after Sydney's Northern Beaches went into lockdown. And I think it all fits into what you were just saying about this communication that you have across all the organisations, because suddenly you couldn't fly in people from interstate to help with a huge test, which I think we still had 30,000 attendees.
Yeah, so what has happened, like if you have a look at the way our season worked, we kind of went into hubs in, as you know, most sports and the likes did for the start of the season. And then as we started, as we say, reducing restrictions, a lot of people came back to Melbourne for the Boxing Day test, and Sydney very quick after the Boxing Day test. And so a whole heap of the Melbourne people were still in Melbourne, and we weren't expecting to have hubs up in Sydney. Our head office is in Melbourne, and we've got a small office in Brisbane for Cricket Australia, but we've got the states and territories. So Cricket New South Wales is in Sydney. And usually, generally speaking, they're not fully responsible for the Boxing Day test. It's an elite sport, it's national, so it's a Cricket Australia thing. So this time round, with all of the Northern Beaches going into lockdown, as well as, you know, it being very hard to fly around, and we weren't in the hubs in Melbourne at that point in time, we couldn't fly the regular amount of team up to Sydney at such a last minute, because we continued to hold it in Sydney. So what we had to do is we had to call out to Cricket New South Wales and anybody that happened to be in Sydney at the time that was in a cricket world, and see how they could come together and support us delivering that. And what that meant was the regular people who may have been stuck in Melbourne could jump on Teams and be a part of the Teams sites that we had, which would help give that handover and that briefing and the constant updates for what would have normally been part of their role to deliver. They could give it to somebody who was, say, from Cricket New South Wales, who was on the ground trying to fulfil a role that they hadn't really done before. And it really meant that, you know, things from instant video messaging, you know, to going, where do I put this, how do I do it, and jumping on a video call, to instant chats, as well as document shares and the likes, was all put into Teams very, very quickly to be able to deliver that test with not having the regular people that we would. And I think, you know, the staff that we pulled together just shows how diverse they are, and how we've got so many more resources available to us because we've got platforms to help communicate that really quickly.
Absolutely amazing. Emma, your team, your personal team was one of the top performing teams. It was called the Tech Leadership Team, I believe. We won't have a time right now to go into how that team operates, but we can do that afterwards in our chat. But I also wanted to just show for everybody who's part of this webinar, show you what it looks like on SWOOP, so we know how we can pinpoint what these high performing teams are. What measures can we look at to know that this is teams, you know, creating some business value? So can I hand over to, you're kind enough to share your technology leadership team on the dashboard, and I'm going to hand over to Emily O'Brien, who's SWOOP's Director for Success in the APAC region. Emily, can you just walk us through what measures should we be looking at to know that we're on the right track for a high performing team?
Excellent. Thanks, Sharon. And thank you so much, Emma, for sharing. So yes, we're going to see how a high performing team really comes to life by looking at the dashboard here in SWOOP. So if we scroll down just a little bit, the first thing that I want to call out is the SWOOP team persona. Now, as a part of this year's report, as we've mentioned earlier on, we found that there's a distinct movement towards self-directed teams this year, and it certainly looks like Cricket Australia's tech leadership team is seeing the benefits of this reciprocated connection happening within the team. It's also quite nicely backed up by what you can see in the network map as well. So it's pretty clear who's in the team and who's contributing. And there's also some, you know, shared accountability and interdependency happening. And I think that also comes back as well to team size, which we also talk about in the report. I think for this team, we've got about 8 members, which I would say is definitely the optimum size that we talk about all the time. So up to 10 users. And this also makes it really easy for leadership to move around depending on the context of the conversations happening as well. As we move a little bit further down, and just to quickly call out two-way relationships. So this is looking at the level of cohesion that we're seeing in the team. We would say hitting a target of around 85% is a really, really strong result. So for this particular team, only just sitting shy at 83%, really great result. The response rate, which should be maybe a little bit further down as well. The goal here would be to leave, ideally you would want to have no posts that are going unanswered, but for the tech leadership team, we do have some, there are some unanswered posts, but I think there's also that level of acknowledgement happening as well through liking, working alongside the reply rate. Also the key player dependency. Now, for this particular team, it's really, really impressive, and it's sitting at, if we scroll down a little bit more, I think it's sitting at 0%. Now, you can't get better than that when it comes to key player dependency. This just means that the spread of interactions and the spread of conversation is very even across all users in the team. And the last part that I want to call out is the team channel activity there as well. So as a part of the Cricket Australia story in the report, we talk a lot about having clearly defined channels. It's one of those really actionable tips. And then there's also a section in the report that I recommend you check out, which is about setting targets and setting goals for your teams as well. So we found that 9 channels is kind of a nice sweet spot to be sitting, and more is definitely not always better when it comes to number of channels. So that's kind of a very, very quick rundown of what this looks like in SWOOP, and thank you so much, Emma, for sharing.